Always a pleasure to come to Harper Adams. It's a reminder to me that there is a vibrant future for British agriculture. And sometimes as Vice President of the NFU, you need to pinch yourself and remind yourself of that. Over my desk every day, you sometimes firefight negativity too often, whether it's concern about farm gate prices, concern about over-regulation, concern about the weather, and so on. And when I come to Harper, I'm reminded that there are better things to be driving our industry on, and there is a great future, and the enthusiasm of Harper students and the enthusiasm that's instilled with them at this university is always very refreshing. So another map to explain where I hail from. I come from the village of St. Osyth, which is just 4 miles south of Clacton-on-Sea, otherwise known as UKIP Central. You may have heard of it in news. And if you just bear with me, I just want to share with you the thing the farmer likes to talk most about, which is his weather. St. Osyth has 2 claims to fame. One is its historic priory, the finest collection of monastic buildings of medieval origin in Western Europe, or so I'm told, but also the fact that it is officially the driest spot in the British Isles, and I have the pleasure of farming officially the driest farm in the British Isles. Always excites a bit of controversy, this, and I basically get hate mail from other farmers from other points along the East Coast saying to me, in essence, how dare you suggest you have a drier farm than me? You are nothing but a charlatan, a fraud and a liar. We demand to see your rainfall records. And there's a simple response to that. It's page 22 of the Guinness Book of Records. I'm in it, you're not. End of issue. Yet I do keep my rain gauge under a high wall near a tree to give me some notoriety, but there we are. And just to expand on this issue of farming, the driest farm in the British Isles, occasionally we find, and this has happened twice in the last 20 years, our annual rainfall dips to below 20 inches. Below 12 inches. Our annual rainfall is 20 inches. Sometimes it dips below 12 inches in a 12-month window. And you may remember from your boyhood and girlhood geography lessons that if you get less than 12 inches of rain in an annual year, you are technically a desert. And so I have a little bit of infamy sometimes as the man that farms the Essex Desert, and I've attracted journalists from semi-serious places such as the Farmers Weekly and the Daily Mail to talk about this. And then the inevitable happened about 10 years ago. The Sun newspaper phoned me up one Sunday morning. I was a bit groggy-headed, having played hockey the day before and drunk too much beer the night before. And the voice on the other end of the phone said, "Hello, Mr. Smith. We're from the Sun newspaper. We're really interested in this fact that you farm a desert in Essex, and we'd like to know more about it. I think our readers would be fascinated. Could we come and do a piece on your farm?" And without thinking, I said, "Yeah, I'm fine with that." And they said, "Good, we'll be in your yard in a couple of hours' time." I put the phone down. I turned to my wife and I said, "What do you know? The Sun newspaper are coming to the farm to do a thing about farming." And she furrowed her brow and she said, "The Sun newspaper, they won't be interested in anything serious. They will turn up with some nonsense." And she was damn right. They turned up with big Chief Blackhawk. His actual name was Dennis. They didn't mention that in the Sun. But as much as you despair of the way the Sun newspaper goes around its journalism, this wasn't some joker out of a fancy dress shop. This was a genuine North American Indian from South Carolina, hit tarmac at Heathrow at 9 o'clock on that Sunday morning on my farm by 11. And as you can imagine, as a genuine North American Indian rain dancer, a very charismatic man, once met, never forgotten, one thing I remember he said to me was, "Guy, the beauty of being a rain dancer is you can always guarantee it will rain after you've done the dance. What you can't guarantee is how soon it will rain after you've done the dance." I was worried for him that rain dancing was a quasi-religious thing handed down from many forebears, and it's something he took sort of earnestly and serious. And out of the earshot of the journalist, I said to him, you do realise the Sun newspaper is a comic. It's not the Times. It's not a serious newspaper. I was worried for him that he might not want to be treated too flippantly with this ancient art. And he got the gist of what I was saying immediately, and he said, "Guy, for £5,000, I'll do what the hell they want me to do." And finally, he put his sun-bronzed hands on my wife's tummy, because my wife, Julia, was heavily pregnant, 8.5 months pregnant at the time. And he looked my wife in her eyes and said, "Julia, that's a little boy. He'll grow to be a fine young man. He'll be a son you are truly proud of." And sure enough, 2 weeks later, my youngest daughter was born. So there we are. And just to quickly finish this story off, people say to me, you know, after the rain dancer came to the farm, did you notice any changes in the patterns of precipitation on your farm after the rain dance? And I say, yeah, we have noticed that it has got a little bit wetter occasionally on the driest farm in Britain, and sometimes it feels like this. And if I had a £10 note every time some joker in the village shouts over the road to me, "Oi, Smithy, get the rain dancer back, he's left the tap on," I would be a rich man. Now, I'm sorry, Mimi, that's taken me 10 minutes of nonsense to get something of substance. If there is some serious point in all of this for the farmer, I suppose it is the issue of climate change. As Vice President of the NFU, I picked this issue up for the organisation. I was always a bit sceptical about climate change because I remember precisely being told 15 years ago that we would no longer see cold, white winters in southern Britain. And my children, who were about that high at the time, they said would never know what it was like to build a snowman. Now, 15 years later, they're all about that high. They have played more snowball fights, built more snowmen than I ever did as a child. And I suppose the point was that the overall forecast as to what would happen to our weather, that we would no longer get cold winters, we would always get warm winters, was wrong. And some farmers 15 years ago did work with that forecast. They started, there's a fruit farm not far from me called Wilkinson Sons, very well-known fruit farm. And they started planting exotics like apricots and peaches and whatever. And of course, that got nipped in the bud in more ways than one, because late frosts we continue to get, which means that we are not being given the olive grove Mediterranean climate that some thought we did. And I wouldn't ever change my farming on the understanding my weather was going to change to a different type of climate. However, I do agree that our weather is becoming more volatile. In 2013, within a few months of each other, we had the wettest winter we ever knew. It felt just like that. We had the strongest gales we'd had since 1992, and we had the highest tide, a farm on the coast, since 1953. And when you get all that coming in one after the other, you realise, yes, my father, he had the weather the way he didn't want it. That's something farmers universally and historically always will have. But there does seem to be more extremes being hit again and again and again. And that clearly impacts on farming. And I think in the future, how farmers undertake the challenge of volatility may be the key to their success. Because one outcome of volatile weather across the globe is volatile markets. This is the wheat price over the last 10, 15 years. And those peaks and troughs are largely dictated by weather events, usually droughts somewhere in Central Asia or Europe or Central America. And this again is the challenge for the farmer. Farming is becoming increasingly speculative. When we put a seed in the ground, we have very little idea what the worth of the produce of that seed will be at the end of the cycle, 12, 18 months' time. And so managing that volatility, again, is the key to this. And when you couple that with the volatility of weather, you understand the enormity of the challenge. Now, there are ways that farmers can weatherproof their farms against weather volatility. We can have better drainage. And I think the way we have managed our soils in the last 20 years has a huge question mark over it. And I think one issue is our land is increasingly badly drained, and we are stamping on it with heavy machinery at the wrong time for various reasons. And so we need to start investing in redraining our soils just like our fathers did with drainage grants in the 60s and early 70s. And maybe government should take a lead on this. Maybe this is a good way to spend CAP money to encourage farmers to weatherproof their farms as they face increasingly volatile weather with heavier rainfall periods more than they had in the past. Similarly, conversely, we can protect against drought by having reservoirs on our farms. So we are in control of the water our crops receive at the crucial parts of their ripening cycle in May and June. I think the way this nation, Britain, handles its water resource in the next 10 years is up for great debate. We live in a crowded island where people have many demands for water, and agriculture is easily forgotten. Agriculture needs to make sure that it retains access to water so it can maintain its production. But I suspect, and I partly agree, that abstracting water from rivers or aquifers in the summer is going to go out of fashion. It's going to be politically unsustainable to ask for that. And so our licenses which enable summer abstraction, we should maybe switch to winter abstraction when water is in spate, when there's plenty of it, and that means digging reservoirs, putting it in reservoirs and having more irrigation capacity. But that also means local planning authorities understanding that when a farmer puts in for a reservoir, rather than kicking it out as an excuse to extract gravel or creating too many lorries in the village, they should realise that this is a strategic part of the way the UK handles climate change in the future. And so weather, access to water, drainage, all very important issues over the next few years. Another graph. This is the trade gap, the export-import gap in the UK. It is a depressing, widening gap. We have gone in real terms from 10 billion 10, 15 years ago to 20 billion today. We are, as a nation, becoming less food secure. At the NFU, one way we've sort of tried to express this in an easy to grab manner is by telling the great UK population that if Britain was a fenced-in island and we were dependent on just our own food production, we would run out of food today on August the 13th. 20 years ago, that used to be October the 12th. Our larder is becoming barer. Now, does this matter? Well, that is a political issue. There is no easy answer to it. In one analysis, Britain has always been a trading nation. We've always never worried too much about being self-sufficient in our food. We've always realised we can import it from wherever. In 1916, in 1939, we realised that we had got ourselves in a pickle by being 80% dependent on imports on food, and strategically we were very vulnerable to defeat by war because of our inability to feed ourselves. Obviously today we don't have German U-boats in the Channel, and one presumes that will never happen again, even with Mrs. Merkel in charge of Germany. And so I think the wartime scenario is no longer a resonating one. However, we face new challenges in the future with climate change, with water access across the globe, with a burgeoning world population going to 9 billion in 40 years' time. And maybe there are future impediments to our food supply that we need to take seriously. Maybe food security is a legitimate political objective nowadays, and maybe we can make that case to government that politicians should take seriously this expanding graph and seek to close it, and they should look to the scientific community as one driver in ways which will be able to do that. Another graph. That is a comparison of the yield and production of the main broadacre crops in the UK compared to the yield line in the major crops across the world. In Britain, we have a rather depressing flat line. My generation of farmers have not seen the gains that my father's generations saw in the 20, 30 years after the Second World War. And yet our competitors in other parts of the globe, and this would be true of countries very similar to us, such as Germany, have seen these gains. And we need to all ask ourselves, both the farming community and the scientific community and the political community, why this is happening. There are a number of very good theories. How we handle our soils would be a good one to start with. Is it about organic matter? Is it about maltreating soils, not draining them properly? Is it about the R&D community not being as well funded, not being as vibrant as it used to be? Is it about outreach? When my father was my age, he had access to free advice on tap. It was a thing called ADAS. It was free to him. He phoned up the ADAS man. He came out to the farm. I'm sorry, it's all he's, but that's how it was in those days, and got that advice. For me now, I no longer have that outreach, and maybe the nexus between the scientific community, the research community, and the practical farmer needs looking at. Maybe we need to invent new ways to improve that outreach. Outreach. Isn't that outrageous? Outreach. So we need to ask these questions as to why this is happening. And then when we find the answer, hopefully we will be able to push that curb back into the ascendant so we become as a nation more food secure. And of course, that graph, as I try to explain to Labour politicians, has important implications for the economy, for employment. Agriculture is the main manufacturing industry in rural areas, and it needs to be a vibrant one. So, and amongst all the reasons as to why those lines might be flatlining, why that gap is increasing, as a Vice President of the NFU, I tend to focus on the regulatory sphere. I can't do much about the weather, although my members think I should be able to do something. I can't do much about world prices. But what I can do something about, hopefully, is regulation. Last year, the NFU launched an initiative called Healthy Harvest, where we drew attention to the fact that we are losing plant protection products at a very rapid rate. This is what's happened over the last 10, 20 years, and the direction of travel is it to lose even more. Some speculate we could lose 75% of the existing herbicides, fungicides, insecticides that we have now. And that would mean that the farmer's toolbox, the means whereby he controls weeds, diseases, and pests, will become worryingly depleted. Now, when we launch this campaign, we are not suggesting farmers cannot see beyond the chemical can. We are not suggesting that they can only seek chemical solutions to controlling diseases, weeds and pests in their crops. IPM is something we need to look at, and every day, even a non-organic farmer looks to cultivations, timing of planting, varieties and the like to control these things through non-chemical means. However, we are convinced at the NFU that if we have a more depleted crop protection toolbox than our competitors in other parts of the world who have access to plant protection products that we don't, then the consequence of that will be to export our agriculture to those places in the world, and that is what is happening. We think regulation is being rushed into on a knee-jerk basis. We think green NGOs in Brussels have got the ear of too many opinion formers and convinced them that banning agrochemicals is per se, in itself, innately, a good thing to do, that Mother Nature provides food rather than science and chemistry. And obviously we do not agree with that analysis. Another, I think, misperception that many of the regulators have is they think that if they ban what they see as slightly dirty old chemistry, then the ag chem manufacturers of the world will simply give us new materials. When you talk to the ag chem manufacturers of the world, they tell you that is not going to happen. That pipeline does not suggest those new materials are coming down the stream. And one reason is because they see Europe as such a badly regulated environment, no longer running around science, that they feel it's an area not worth investing in. And so for myself, who's struggling with blackgrass control, I'm not going to see new blackgrass herbicides in the future. In fact, I may see the only ones I've got that work now, such as glyphosate, such as curb, I will not have them in the future. And so we feel that this idea that it will all be all right, we're worrying about nothing, doesn't stand up to any political analysis. I think we need to push this political campaign on a number of fronts to explain to regulators the importance of plant health products to them and to consumers. I think farmers have always been very nervous about talking about pesticides in conjunction with food. They feel that the media have so entrenched consumers with the idea that pesticides equal poisons, equals compromised human health, that we've lost the argument. And the fact that a fungicide may make food safer is barely ever mentioned. I had Country File come out onto the farm, hate to name drop, but got Tom Heap into my spray shed and said to him, Tom, this is a can of a triazole fungicide. We are likely to lose this because it will be deemed to be an endocrine disruptor and therefore it will be banned. What I use this stuff for is primarily to keep my plants free of disease, and it controls a thing called mycotoxins. And we are being told by regulators that we must minimise the amount of mycotoxins in our wheat because there is a vague connection between mycotoxins and cancer. It would be ridiculous to ban the thing that controls mycotoxins and to expect us to reduce mycotoxins at the same time. It's not joined up thinking. The other interesting thing about triazoles for a consumer perspective is that they are regularly found in human medicine. And what I did was, Tom was in front of me and the camera was running, I produced from my pocket a tube of something that my dear wife sometimes uses to control skin irritation. And that is a triazole fungicide. The point is it's the same chemistry. There isn't a human health issue with me using triazoles. And I think it's those simple sorts of arguments we need to get over to consumers more. So I think there's things that farmers can help themselves with when it comes to retaining this crop protection armoury. This is my marshland scene, these lazy ditches that weave and meander through the flat St. Joseph Marsh, which I crop. I have margins where I don't bother to crop, that's the biodiversity. Those little dog kennels on telephone posts are not dog kennels on telephone posts, they are barn owl boxes, and the barn owls thrive in amongst the rough grasses on the edge of the crop. And then in the gut of the field, in the 95% of my farm, I go for full production for food. And on the edge, I go for full production of biodiversity. I'm a great believer in farmers managing their land for biodiversity rather than just leaving it to nature. And of course, what that margin does is it enables me to make sure I keep pesticides out of watercourses, which takes the foot off the accelerator when it comes to seeing them being banned. We have floristically enhanced margins. I think the bee issue is one we are going to have to live with as farmers. I have some real concerns about knee-jerk banning of neonics and the like, but I understand that in terms of the industry have seen to be proactive in conserving the bee and bee numbers, and this is what we do. Dad passed away about 5 years ago, and one of the things, last things I did with Dad is I got him in the car and did what he liked to do best, and that's drive around the farm. And I thought, I know, I'll go and show him one of our floristically enhanced ELS margins. It's looking really good. It's knee deep in bumblebees and loads of flowers. And Dad took one look at it and he said, some prat's missed the outside of the field with a sprayer. And there you are. There's a generation shift encapsulated in one comment. But I think in future we are going to have to be clever at this as farming intelligently with science to produce plenty of pollen for pollinators, and it can be done through farmer skill. It's best done through farmer skill. It's not best done just by leaving bits of your farm in the hope that Mother Nature will take over. And there we are on the edge of Clacton with our birdseed mixes, and it's the same thing. And I understand that taxpayers pay for my ELS money. It's a government scheme, and it's good to do that work in front of the taxpayer. And many of them say to me, about how they see lots of birds in those areas. And so it's a good advert for me in terms of communication. And it helps me keep my sprayer away from their gardens. I'm not Georgina Downs, I don't think there's an issue, but I understand presentationally there is an issue. And I seem to get on okay with my Clacton neighbours. They wave to me whenever I drive past my sprayer. I think they're waving, but who can be sure? And I think farmers need to take more interest in the biodiversity audits of their farm. I think biodiversity auditing is far too much controlled, shall we say, without being too controversial, by organisations that have a vested interest in talking up the negatives and seeing what isn't there rather than what is. I think farmers have been partly responsible for this because they failed to do the work themselves. And so there I am with my neighbour, David Wilkin, and we're ringing barn owl chicks. David is a licensed ringer. I sometimes give talks to wildlife groups, like I did Chelmsford Wildlife Trust a couple of months ago, and I put this slide up and then I joke hilariously, and here I am harvesting barn owl chicks, aren't they delicious? Obviously a politically incorrect thing to say, but it's about understanding the biodiversity of your farm, understanding it, just like you monitor your yields of wheat, you should monitor your yields of barn owl chicks to see if your conservation measures are working. And I'm very proud of the fact my conservation measures are working and our barn owl chicks numbers continue to rise, as opposed to my flat wheat yield graph, which is a rather depressing flat line. Because that is the headline we struggle with. Where have all the flyers gone? An eerie silence is descending on the British countryside, unless modern agriculture changes its tune. Songbirds will go the way of the dodo. It's not true. The British countryside is a beautiful biodiverse place that produces lots of food, but not as much as it used to, and it has lots of nature, if you did but bother to focus into it, which Richard Girling of the Times obviously didn't. So I'm a great believer in farmers being proactive with their communication, and I think it needs backing up with the ag science community. And I'm sure you are all involved in this sort of thing. So at farm level, I'm a great believer in educating people about where their food comes from, about why management is as it is, because a skylark nesting area just looks like a bit of boring green bit. You have to explain to the general public what you're about, and you have to explain where their food comes from. That looks like a lawn. It's their daily bread, if they think about it and think the story through. And there we are at our local show, the Tendering Show, the finest one-day show in the country, and that we see as a showcase and a chance to communicate our messages over, to explain how farmers use technology to produce a secure supply of food. I think in terms of technology, we are on the brink of a very exciting technological revolution in agriculture, and Harper Adams is in many ways the cradle of that information. I think in a few years' time, tractor drivers will no longer be tractor drivers. They will drive the machine to the farm, and then they will program the machine to do the work for them. It's a really exciting time. Lasers, telemetry, GPS, satellite positioning, all exciting technologies. We will need to keep the British population on our side. The prospect of a robot tractor in a field outside a garden is one they may react negatively to, and we need to be wary of that and get forward with our messages. I think our fathers in the past maybe moved too fast with technology and didn't take consumers with them, which is why we don't have access to a safe technology such as GM as we do now. And so we need to be more coherent and more proactive with our messages, and I think we need to work in conjunction with the scientific community in that challenge. Mimi, at that note, I've said quite enough. Thank you very much for inviting me today, and have a good year. Thank you.